Hello, everybody. I'm Marcos Melissas. I'm here with Carrie Aleveld. Welcome to our weekly show about politics, Daily Kos, The Brief. We have a great show for you today. You know, I've been obsessing about Mississippi every chance I get. It almost seems like I'm a one-trick pony, and so I'm really excited that today we have two-time Mississippi candidate Mike Espy. He ran for Senate twice, amongst other things. And so we're going to talk about just how realistic it is, this whole idea that maybe Mississippi can be the next Georgia. I think it is. We'll see what Mike Espy has to say about that. And it really is. I'm a one-trick pony. So
you're like a dog with a bone. You can't let it go. You just can't let it go.
Carrie, I was like this with Georgia for 10 years. Like I go back and I could see my writing 10 years ago talking about how Georgia is demographically a purple state. And people would laugh or they'd shrug me off or nobody took it seriously until, well, whoa, suddenly Georgia is blue. Not blue, purple, right? But Joe Biden won it, and we got 2 Senate seats there. So I actually think Mississippi is on that similar trajectory. Now, it's nothing soon. I mean, let's not say this is not an imminent switch, but it is the kind of state that, given the proper investment in on-the-ground organizing, the way Stacey Abrams did for the last 8 years, Georgia didn't happen overnight. And this is a theme that we've talked about with Georgia and Arizona, and hopefully we'll get into Texas and North Carolina, but these states don't flip overnight.
Right. So true. My big question for you is, one of the things that I think made Georgia possible, it was obviously partly the organizing in the rural areas, right? And just,
yes.
That diehard effort to get out there and sign people up. But the other thing is that Georgia spent almost 20 years being a destination. Atlanta spent almost 20 years being a destination spot for, Southern kids who went off to school and graduated and then said, where do we want to live in the South, right? And Atlanta really became a hot spot for them. And I think it was part of what managed to turn the demographics. And I just wonder, Jackson is Mississippi's biggest city, and could it have that type of pull? People were talking about a similar type of demographic change in potentially in North Carolina, with the triangle, the research triangle drawing people and whatever, but that state hasn't quite turned the corner yet. I don't know. I'm just wondering, the rural possibilities are really big in Mississippi. But the question to me is getting that type of, suburban educated voter attraction that Atlanta has, the pull, the draw it has.
Yeah, no, for sure. And every one of these states is different. Arizona didn't have that sort of central. Phoenix wasn't exactly the hot destination. It was just an untapped sort of reservoir of American Indian and Latino potential voters that had not been activated. So every state's different. And that's why I'm excited to talk to Mike Espy about what Mississippi needs in order to sort of get over that hump. But before we bring him on, Carrie, I am really struck at the I don't understand that.
I feel like we've been marveling over this for like 3 weeks.
The Republicans refusing to vote for the COVID relief bill. This is giving free money to people. It polls into 70% everywhere we look, right? It is wildly popular. And yet, there was a poll today, I think, Carrie, that had the COVID relief bill more popular than puppies.
It did. It was. And I wrote it up. It was more popular than puppies. I think people, if I didn't write up that part of it, it was cute, but I didn't write up that part of it. But I think more people wanted the COVID relief bill at like close to 50%. It was close to that versus puppies getting a puppy was in like, 23, 25% or something like that. So
more popular than
more popular. Yeah.
And now, after the Republicans in the House voted 100%, not a single defection, not even the so-called moderates voted for it. Now it's going to the Senate, and the Senate's going to be a little more interesting because you have a couple of independent-ish Republicans like Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski, and maybe even Susan Collins of Maine, who haven't particularly been receptive to leadership's demands on things like the impeachment vote, right? But Mitch McConnell is actually whipping for 100% Republican rejection of this bill. So once again, they're seeing these numbers, the mass popularity of this vote, and yet they're making this bet that voting against it will help them in 2022. Like, what are they thinking? Do you have any ideas?
Well, oh, trying to get into the GOP mind is always a dangerous place to go. So, I mean, first of all, they're whipping just like they did in the House. And like you said, they're doing in the Senate now, right? They're whipping votes against it, which is a lot different than saying we oppose it at the leadership level, but we're going to let people take a vote of conscience or vote your district, right? So they didn't even want people to vote their district, vote their state. I mean, they don't even, that's not even the consideration for them.
They want 2022 to be a referendum on this COVID relief bill.
I find it crazy, to be honest. And here's the bet that they've got to be making. They've either got to be making the bet that, the economy is going to tank, that this isn't going to help. And then they'll be able to say, well, none of us voted for this. It's all the Democrats' fault, right? I mean, that's what leadership, or they're betting that the tribalism of not voting for something that was, brought by, if the economy doesn't tank and things go well, they're voting that the tribalism is more important than helping out their own constituents, which is a completely, which is just a cynical ploy. It's just horrible that they would place tribalism, and sticking with their party, sticking with Trump or whatever, over actually doing what their constituents may need. And many of their constituents want. I mean, on top of this 70% that we're talking about, and I've looked at many, many polls now, and they're all at, approaching 70% support for the whole bill or over it. And key provisions of it in this puppy poll today had there were 4 provisions, including the direct payments, including increasing access to vaccines, placing a limit on premiums, on health insurance premiums, so they weren't more than 9% of your income. Those type of things, they all pulled it over 50% with Republican voters. Republican voters, right? So this is, I mean, I personally, and I wrote this weekend, I personally think that Republicans are doing Democrats a favor. Democrats are going to live and die in 2022 by how well they manage to get a hold of coronavirus, right?
And that's fair. That is totally fair.
That's what Biden ran on. That's what they have. They have control of Congress now. So, it's up to them to pass this legislation. And, but Republicans are just, even in districts, because there are these small number of districts, right? 16 districts, right? That are crossover districts in 2020, where someone
smallest number in 70 years,
smallest number in a long time. And where people either, where people, right, these crossover districts, or these, where people split their tickets, where they voted for either Biden at the top and Republicans down ballot, or they voted for Trump at the top and Democrats down ballot. And so you've got 16 of these districts. I mean, these are exactly the type of districts where nine Republicans hold seats right now in districts that Biden won. And this is exactly where you would think that, that leadership would want, because, I mean, the control of the House could come down to like 2 or 3 seats in 2022, or not. I mean, or it could be a landslide one way or the other, and we end up, Democrats either grow the majority or lose. But, why you wouldn't poise your people to vote their districts so that they're the most competitive that they can possibly be, why you would back them into the corner of of voting against this, right? So no one wanted to be the sole person.
Yeah, they think that this old playbook where they can run and say Democrats weren't bipartisan will somehow move votes. Like there's somebody out there who's going to base their vote on the bipartisan actions and bipartisan defined the Mitch McConnell way, right? It's with Republican votes in Congress, as opposed to, like you said, legislation that is popular, not just with the American people, but with Republicans having majority support amongst Republicans, rank and file Republicans. So, Carrie, I think it's time to bring our guest on. He is Mike Espy. He's a former congressman. He is a former Secretary of Agriculture. He is a two-time Senate candidate in the state of Mississippi. So, Secretary Espy, thank you so much for joining us.
Marcos, thank you so much for having me. Good to see everybody.
So, Secretary, I have this theory, and I swear I'm this one-trick pony lately, where I've just been talking about Mississippi's the next Georgia, Mississippi's the next Georgia. Nobody believes me, because when you look at the actual numbers, right, Donald Trump won Mississippi by, like 16 points. Am I completely crazy to be talking up Mississippi as a state that we can make competitive?
Well, I'm on that pony with you. I'm right there with you. Mississippi is not Georgia. Jackson is not Atlanta. But in about 5, 6, 7 years, I think we're going to be there. And I think that my race really shows it. We got more votes. I ran 2018 and then again in 2020. And we got 46.6% in 2018. And this last cycle, 2020, we got more votes than any Democrat who's ever run for federal office in Mississippi's history. We got more votes than Barack Obama 2008, more votes than Barack Obama 2012. In 2020, more votes than Joe Biden. We got 40,000 more votes than Joe Biden. We led the ticket. And it's not just black votes. We got more Republican votes than any Democrat running for the Senate in America, except the candidate in Montana. So, and we still lost. So I think the difference is just not being organized enough. Reverend Barber, someone we all know, head of the Poor People's Campaign, he has a saying. He says Mississippi is not so much red as it is unorganized. And by that he means very low income people have a propensity, sometimes so many obstacles, socioeconomically, educationally. They're not informed as they ought to be. They're not motivated sometimes as they should be. And so they therefore don't vote. And so it was our job. I'm not putting the onus on them. It was our job to get them out to vote. And I think that we came up a little bit short because of COVID, because of all of that going on back then, but mostly because we raised $16 million. That's plenty enough money to win in Mississippi, not nearly enough to win in Georgia. But in Mississippi, it is. But the money didn't come in until about September, October, and the election was in November. So if any of your listeners could just remember one thing, early money is the best money, early investment. I talked to my friend Stacey Abrams, who's also Mississippian, and she says to me, in fact, we're going to be talking again next week. She says to me that everybody thinks that we did this in one cycle. It took 10 years to do this.
Right.
And so it's going to take about almost that much longer for Mississippi to enter the pantheon of swing states. Right now, we have about 38% African-American, more than any state in the nation per capita. And in about 10 years from now, they say it's going to be up like 46, 47%. That's more than enough to get out to vote and then encourage crossover. So I will say this.
Yeah.
This election, 2020, the highest turnout in Mississippi's history on both sides. We have about 2.1 million voting age population, and about 1.31 million showed up to vote. That's 60.2%. So I'm happy that more voted for me than anyone else in the nation in Mississippi, more than Joe Biden. But on the other side, they responded to the Donald Trump clarion call. He says, come out and vote in person. And by God, they did. And that's why we
Can I just ask real quick, since you mentioned early money, and this is becoming a regular, drum that we've been pounding on, but if people were to want to invest in Mississippi right now, today, what is one of the best organizations that you think they could send money to? I mean, short of sending money to a candidate right now, right? Are there organizations like Fair Fight Georgia or whatever that are doing that organizing work?
Sure. Well, again, I've got to invoke my friend Stacey Abrams' name. We have Fair Fight Mississippi.
Oh,
and so
great.
they did a really good job in voter information, voter education. They didn't have in their charter, they're not so much encouraging people to get out to vote. They're mostly legal. So we do have Fair Fight Mississippi, but more than that, I would like them to invest in the state party, because that's where we see entrenched weaknesses. Joe Biden did endorse me, but that campaign really, honestly, to be honest, that's pretty much all they did. So if they'd come in earlier to have done more, at least with the state party, to register or to vote, to encourage the turnout, that's really what we need. And there are organizations here to do that.
So, Secretary, I'm almost kind of bummed that you mentioned our friend Reverend Barber, because we've been talking to them about having him on the show, and I'm going to be asking him about Mississippi instead of North Carolina.
Yes,
but
he's been in Mississippi. Whenever you're the head of the Poor People's Organization, you're going to be familiar with Mississippi. So he's very educated on rural vote and what it takes to just motivate people to come out. I mean, I've done a tour as of late, for other purposes since I lost, and I just get so disheartened that when I walk in, most everyone will know me. Probably 70% of them voted for me, but then there's another 30%. They didn't even know there was an election. What did you run for? And I'm going, okay, So we just need more education, more information, compelling them to come out, making sure they understand they have a vested interest in voting. It just seems like that work should no longer have to be done, but it does.
So there are two sort of main factors that when I look at Mississippi that are sort of impediments to winning, and our challenges is a better word. The challenges we need to overcome to make Mississippi a competitive state. I'll let Carrie ask about the rural part of Mississippi, because it's half the state is rural. It's the fourth largest percentage of any state in the country, the fourth most rural state in the country.
Yes.
And it blows my mind that there's only one city above 100,000, which is Jackson, and only two between 50 and 100,000. So it's very much a rural state. And I know Carrie loves talking about rural America, so I'll leave that to her. My question is on the demographic side of it. So yes, you mentioned 38% of the state is Black. Then you have another 3 to 4% that are Latino and Asian and mixed race. So you have low 40%. If you were to sort of look at the demographics, you think, okay, you only need about 15-20% of the white vote to actually have a competitive state. And we're not getting 15 to 20% of the white vote, right? I think we're lucky to get 12% in any given election. How do you overcome that? Or do you even need to overcome that? Is the demographic changes in the state going to overwhelm that ability of the white vote to basically overrule this large non-white community in the state?
We have 82 counties in Mississippi, and in this last election, 5 counties were Donald Trump and Mike Espy. 5. So you got to believe that these voters were, in many cases, white. And then, as I said, we beat Joe Biden by 40,000 votes. So those that went in the poll, you'd have to extrapolate and say the difference between the Biden vote and the Mike Espy 40,000 plus vote were white persuasion votes.
Okay.
So they're here. And again, we're no longer as cosmopolitan as Georgia. We're not there yet, but we do have a lot of suburban growing areas, like those areas outside of Memphis, Tennessee,
Right.
where we did very, very, very well. And then we have the college towns around, you may be familiar with the University of Mississippi.
Yeah.
Well,
Who isn't?
that's in an urban, growing suburban area. We did extremely well there. On the eastern side of Mississippi, we have other college towns, Mississippi State University. We did very well there. White Housewives. We were 60% with white voters 30 years and below. You know,
Oh,
and then on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where they vote like more well, on the western side, they vote more like New Orleans than Mississippi. So they're just not large enough, Marcos. They need to grow, and I think that it is coming. So if we have a candidate that is interesting, dynamic, and I'll leave it to history to say if I was that person or not. But
you came pretty close. You came 6.5 points from winning in 2018 in a state that everybody thinks is just massively Republican. That was a huge accomplishment. So don't sell yourself short. Not in front of me, anyway.
And again, the money didn't come in. This race, we got 16 million. That race, it was 7 million.
Yeah.
But the money didn't come in until the runoff, which was 3 weeks. So imagine we're laboring from January to October on $2 or $3 million. Everything you have to do, TV, get out to vote and everything. And then boom, the money comes. It's like gushing in the last 3 weeks when people begin to pay attention. So I know in 2018, we could have done even better. I mean, that was a runoff and Donald Trump was not on the ballot. So we got 46.4. We could have done better if the money had come in earlier. Again, 3 weeks is and you get in $4 million.
It's frustrating. Yeah, you can't do anything except throw it on TV. Yeah,
it is very frustrating. That's why I told everybody, please invest early. And this time they did. We raised 16 million. We gave 3 million to the Democratic Party to do what it had to do, and then the rest of it we put on TV and all of that. But again, it only came in September and October. In order to go into the rural areas.
Mr. Secretary, can I ask then, what do you think, and this may be the same answer, but what do you think is your biggest growth demographic profile, short-term and long-term? I mean, short-term and long-term may be different growth demographics, but if you had, if you, for instance, had 16 million right now to put into something in the next year, what kind of demographic would you be trying to turn out? And then where do you think the biggest growth demographic is? Because it's really interesting. I just want to, for our viewers, point out the difference between what you did in Mississippi versus what happened in Georgia, which is, President Biden, or then candidate Joe Biden, outran the Democratic candidates in November. He outran them, and you outran Biden in Mississippi. So that's pretty fascinating in and of itself. So I just wonder, what do you think the most immediate growth demographic is, and then long term, what do you think the growth demographic is?
I think thanks for the question. I'll answer it, but I think the reason between the disparity of the differential between the Biden and Espy was the lack of the Biden investment in Mississippi. So we brought them to the poll, and they voted for Biden when they got there. So I just think that was a mistake. He wasn't going to win Mississippi, but he would have done a little bit better. But it will help me even more, frankly. But I understand that the growth demographic, you're asking long term and short term. Long term is going to be in the African American vote. Again, all the data, all the prognosticators that I'm reading say that in 10 years, Mississippi is going to be near 50% an African American state. So look, when it reaches that, you're going to have 2 black senators, an African American governor. Yes, that is definitely going to happen.
Let's fast forward
8 to 10 years. Right now, between now and the next 2 or 3 years, I really think it's the youth vote. The youth vote, regardless of race. Sometimes I'm still disappointed that they did not vote as they should have. And the example I gave you a little while ago about going in a place where someone asked me, what did I run for? There was a young woman, maybe 19, years old, 20 years old. She had no idea that I had been a candidate on the ballot 2 months earlier. So I think it's the youth vote. They're here. They need to be motivated. They need to be compelled to understand that voting and participating in democratic elections, small d, will help them in their life. This young woman was a waitress in a restaurant. Well, it was takeout due to COVID. Uh, and I'm saying, okay, like, what do you make? And you certainly don't make $15 an hour. That's what I'd be voting for if I were in the U.S. Senate. So maybe it's my fault that I didn't reach her, didn't get to her, didn't convince her that I was running and I will help her. So I'll take that fault. But between now and 2 and 3 years, the difference would be youth participation to vote for Democratic candidates, and that would get us closer. But in 10 years from now, we're going to be a swing state for sure.
That's actually a sort of a great segue into the messaging side of the Democrats' problem in Mississippi. I think we talked to a fellow named Matt Hildreth. He runs an organization called Rural Votes, and his whole idea is that if you look at issue by issue, Democratic policies are actually very, very popular, like a $15 minimum wage. But the Democratic Party brand, for whatever reason, is dirt. And so, first of all, I assume that's why so many white voters in Mississippi, with a overlay of racism, are as Republican as they are. Is there a message that gets through to them? Is passing this COVID relief bill, is that something that would help Mississippi Democrats down the road? What do you think?
It was more difficult in this presidential cycle than in the one I ran before, simply because they came out to vote for Donald Trump. I mean, my opponent, the senator who won, got about 5% fewer votes than Donald Trump. So I mean, look at the strata. You have Joe Biden, 40,000 plus Mike Espy. You got Donald Trump, and then you got 5% fewer votes for his opponent. So the difference was Trump. Okay, there's no doubt. He told them to come on November, come personally. Don't mail your vote. It's rigged. So come, and they did. They blew the hinges off of the voting precincts. So that was the difference in this election. But I think what we have to do to answer your question, Marcos, is just to get out there early. We got a lot of rural votes because we focus on rural issues. We try to get beyond the cultural stuff. Think about this. Mississippi changed its flag. The flag had a Confederate iconography. That is gone now. They voted for medical marijuana. Got 70% of the vote in Mississippi. And something that a lot of people are not aware of, that was a measure in the 1890 Constitution that gerrymandered black votes. So in order to run for office back then, until about, November, in order to win statewide office, you had to win a majority of all of the legislative districts. Whereas in 1890, black voters who constituted the majority of the population only lived, they were congregated in certain areas. So that was put into the Constitution to eliminate any black person from ever being elected to statewide office. And that is gone. That won about 70% as well. So you had 3 progressive measures all passing on the same day.
Easily.
And when I was on the ballot. So Mississippi is changing, man. And so in my race, we did as well as we did with the white vote in concentrating on rural issues like Medicaid expansion, making sure the rural hospitals could remain open, making sure that we had prescription drug costs that could be covered by Medicaid expansion, making sure that the emergency rooms remain open. And people, I think, heard that beyond their trepidation with all the cultural stuff. So it was very difficult in this environment. I would have loved to have gotten the same raw vote total in 2018 than I did, and then I would have won. We got more votes than the Democrat ever running for federal office in Mississippi's history this time, but we had Trump at the top of the ticket, which really hurt.
Do you think that you got those because of these progressive issues that the progressive things that were on the ballot that people were probably gravitated towards, that the same people who voted for you gravitated towards those particular issues?
Yeah, that certainly helped. That certainly helped, especially in these suburban, semi-urban areas that I've mentioned before, around Memphis, Tennessee, and then the college towns for sure. And the medical marijuana initiative had money behind it, and they ran that as a nonpartisan type of initiative. They were very, very successful. So yes, when there's money behind these things, those things tend to do a lot better. But you got to come in early.
Joe Trippi was your strategist, one of your strategists. Is that right? Am I wrong?
2018, yes.
2018. So I remember we had him on, and he talked about, running these focus groups and having, I think particularly white women sort of look down at their shoes while they were saying, I guess I'm going to vote for a Democrat. I mean, just kind of, and they weren't talking, I don't think they were necessarily just talking about you, that they were voting. It was a vote against Trump is what it was. It was this registration of a vote against Trump because he was just too bad. But Trippi was talking about this just deep ingrained cultural, hesitancy and rejection of the term Democrat.
Yeah.
Do you think you can overcome that? I mean, not just you personally, but Democrats, or you personally?
Well, I mean, in many ways, that was a toxic brand, certainly in 2020. But let me just give you an anecdote. I'll be very, very quick. So I was driving in a county west of here, incredibly red, right? And I got lost. So I was trying to turn around, and there was a white woman, probably around 50 years of age. And she was accepting donations to get into the park. I'd made a wrong turn going into a park. So I asked, she came to the car, and as soon as she saw me, her face lit up. And I went, okay, I'm in a rural area, white woman. She didn't vote for me. I rolled down the window, and she said, Mr. Espy. I said, yeah. She says, we love you. She said, we love you. And so my countenance brightened. And I said, well, great. Well, did you vote for me? She said, I couldn't. She said, it's that abortion thing. And you're a Democrat. I'll say, well, okay. I'll say, well, I'm a Democrat. Yeah. I said, well, let's talk about life and choice and all that. And we had a good conversation. And I may have flipped her had I been a chance to do it earlier. So it's just that brand that you bring, all these cultural issues that they're likely to already be predisposed to not to like you. But you got to get there and speak with them one-on-one, and you can flip them voter by voter. We just did not have enough time.
So, Mr. Secretary, we are almost out of time, but one last question. Are you looking at any future runs for office, or what's your future right now look like in the years ahead?
When I was 30 years old, I ran for Congress and won. First Black congressman since Reconstruction. And that district was not majority Black back then. It was not. And we flipped it. We got 9% of the Black vote and about 12% of the white vote, and flipped that. And then I served. And then, of course, we know I ran twice. Marcos, you never say never. I spent 3 years of my life. I'm in my law office today. I'm the only one here. I've got to regenerate this law practice, and I think I'm going to devote my next few years to doing that. But you may not see me for a while, but I'm not saying I'm done.
All right.
I'm going to be one of those helping to to register voters. I'm going to be helping on the issues relating to things people care about and need, like the Medicaid expansion. I want to do some things around that. I want to, even though I'm not in the Senate, and I regret that, there were issues that I ran on. I ran to do something, not just to be something. And I'm going to keep working on those issues. And if that means I have to run for something later on, we'll see.
Who can I just ask one last? This is how I am as a journalist. There's always one last question. But who are the stars that we should be, Democratic stars that we should be keeping our eyes on in Mississippi?
Well, we have a really good mayor. I'm supporting him. We have the municipal races this cycle in April and in June. His name is Lumumba. He's a great guy.
That's Jackson.
Jackson mayor. We have some young. If I could speak racially, if you don't mind,
yeah.
We have a white female who just beat a Republican in the Mississippi legislature who had been there 30 years. She was 2 years old when he got elected, and she beat him in the last legislative race last year. So I knocked on doors with her in 2019. We have another Black woman.
What's her name?
Shonda Yates.
Shonda. Yes.
Shonda Yates. Yeah. We have a Black nurse, frontline worker up in North Mississippi who won by 4 votes. And she beat a Republican legislator who had been there for years and years. And she won the white vote in the Memphis suburbs. So there are a lot of them. I could give you a list of 50.
And what's her name? Sorry.
I will text it to you.
Okay, all right.
But there are others. There are others.
Okay.
There are others. A lot of others.
We'll look her up. We should have known as much as it. We should have known too. So anyway, we'll get back to it.
So, Secretary Mike Espy, thank you so much for joining us. An incredible pleasure, and I suspect we'll be calling on you again as I continue digging into Mississippi and our chances of flipping the state blue in the years ahead. Thank you so much.
And I'll be digging with you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Carrie, one of the Mississippi is not like other states that are sort of flippable. And this is what makes it every state is unique. Every state is different. Arizona is different than Georgia. They took different paths to flipping them blue. Mississippi is only about 30% suburban. The Memphis suburbs are a big part of that. That is, the national average is about 50%. So it is not only low, but it's the 4th lowest percentage of suburbs. Or the third or fourth. It is the 4th most rural. Doesn't have a lot of cities. Right. Jackson's the largest city, 160,000 people. So when you look at Mississippi, you can't use the same playbook as other states because you don't have the big suburbs to draw on. White college-educated people in the suburbs. You don't have that to draw on, really. It is a low education state. In fact, it is last in college degrees in the country. So education's a big driver of partisan identification. That's one reason the suburbs are shifting. So you don't have that to go off. The white population is extremely evangelical, and the religiosity of a white person is actually a big partisan marker as well. So when you look at those factors, you're like, oh yeah, it doesn't look like a typical state that might be trending in our direction. But then there's that question of the Black vote is growing exponentially. You have that youth vote that isn't as Republican as their elders. And in fact, the white youth vote, just youth vote in general, but including white people, were a big factor for Mississippi ditching its Confederate flag. They were in the college campuses. There was huge activism. And I don't want to give white people the credit, but they were very, white students were very engaged in that battle. So it's a different path, but it's there.
Right. Well, I don't doubt that. And especially when you start to talk about the demographic growth, right? But it was very interesting that the secretary said that he would put money immediately into trying to get out the youth vote. That was interesting. But I keep going back to, and it's only because we've heard it in several interviews now with people who focus on, flippable voters or, people who are thinking of voting, who are regularly vote Republican, thinking of voting Democrat, or, have flipped their vote for one election cycle. And we've heard this from Joe Trippi. We heard it from Matt Hildreth of ruralorganizing.org, which we brought up earlier, who you brought up earlier. And recently with this special segment we did with Never Trumper Sarah Longwell, it's just that Democrats have this brand problem in these, right of center districts, in these red leaning states, where people just, it's really cultural and it has little to nothing to do with policy. I mean, there is the abortion issue, but for the most part, things like, if you look at Missouri, for instance, Missouri just voted for the Medicaid expansion, right? I mean, last year, and that's something progressives have been fighting for, right? And so if you look at and Mississippi, the flag vote, and also legalizing medical marijuana, right? So these are progressive issues that we've been championing, right? And the question is, why can't Democrats win on policy, right? And we've been screaming about this for years, progressives. Our policies poll well, right? Our policies poll well. People like them. And yet, Sarah Longwell was saying, look, if you go in and do these focus groups and they're just, these sort of the Republican voters got a list of things they don't like about Democrats, but what they understand about what's really happening on policy is just completely divorced from reality. And of course, her strategy, what she suggested to us in this interview, which I thought was really interesting on a number of levels, but what she suggested to us was a good formula for Democrats in 2022 was to get messengers in these districts that couldn't be easily painted as lefty, right? Dismissed as socialists or somehow anti-American. And in particular, she was talking about getting veterans. And I know you're a vet, so you have a stronger, you have sort of a stronger relationship to this than I do. Although my brother was in the Navy, and my father was.
My son is literally right. Yeah, my son is literally right now, as we speak, enlisting in the National Guard. So it's military service is important in our family, and I'm glad I passed it on to my son. So you mentioned Sarah Longwell. We actually did get a chance to talk to her. We had some technical difficulties. We worked them out, and we recorded a special segment with her. Carrie, do you want to introduce, talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is, you guys, anyone who's been following our show knows we tried to get Sarah Longwell on, and we finally just said, okay, let's do a special segment with her so we can work out the audio issues ahead of time. And this is just a quick teaser of our 30-minute interview with her, which, again, I encourage people to go listen to, especially if you're interested in 2022 strategy and if you're interested in what the heck is going on in the Republican Party. So it was a really interesting conversation. Here is a question we asked her about, a potential third party potential third party coming from the Never Trumper side of the Republican Party, right? And she counseled against it and also didn't think it was going to happen. And here's what she had to say about that.
Several years. And look, there's a lot of really well-meaning people, and they don't consider themselves Democrats. And so they're thinking, well, what do we do? What do you do if you're a conservative and you don't think you're a Democrat, but this MAGA Republican Party just isn't for you? Well, we can start a third party. The problem is like a lot of things, right? That's a bunch of people in Washington saying, well, if you build it, maybe they'll come. But my view is that actually you create sort of a dangerous scenario. Like if you believe, as I do, that the current version of the Republican Party is a dangerous version of itself, right? Is an anti-democratic version of itself to the extent that I could have never imagined. If you believe
100%, we're 100% with you.
Then you have to think like what you do is you have to keep that political party from power. And the way that you do it is with the biggest, broadest coalition possible. And I think sometimes people think like, well, maybe you can split the Republican Party, by having this little faction, but that's not really what happens. It's the same reason I was really against Justin Amash running, because every poll showed that he would have pulled just as much from the center left as he would from this. It's not if you form some kind of center right party or party of conservatives that like it automatically breaks off, from the Republican coalition. That's not quite how it would work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that segment or that special episode is on our YouTube channel. You should check it out. It was actually retweeted by Bill Crystal, which is, we live in crazy times. Carrie, it was so weird.
It was, and not only retweeted, he tweeted it out and said that we had ably moderated this interview with Sarah Longwell, and it was like it is like bizarro world. I mean, he was being, he was being nice, he was being generous, right? But it just was like kind of bizarro
it's such
world.
A weird world. Yeah, we're
like tweeting us out, but anyway.
Yeah, agreeing with Jennifer Rubin every day, right? It feels a little dirty.
Honestly, I can't tell you how many tweets from Jennifer Rubin I agree with. I mean, I really figured after this election, but the election was so close in many ways that it didn't ruin Trump enough for us to, we still have to sort of, as Sarah was counseling, make friends with each other in order to kind of save the country until we can get the Republican Party the dangerous version of the Republican Party as we now know it, just ruin that party so it can be rebuilt by different people.
So, Carrie, that's all the time we have this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks to Secretary Mike Espy for joining us and talking and indulging in my Mississippi obsession. Thanks to Walter Einenkel for producing the show. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating wherever you're watching the show or wherever you get your podcasts. You can always talk to us at dailycoast.com or on Twitter at dailycoast. See you next week.